All right. So, hello everyone, and welcome to our new seminar series organized by the QAAFI Student Association. And the theme is Future Foods for a Sustainable Planet. Today, Charlotte and I will be hosting this session. And my name is Saskia. I'm a PhD student at the University of Queensland in the Nutrition and Food Science Department.
And I am Charlotte. I'm at the University of Queensland at QAAFI, and I'm from the Center for Crop Science.
All right. So our food supply chain from farm to fork contributes to a major environmental impact, and thus we have to reduce these emissions, and this has become a major challenge in our food supply chain and in general in the food industry. And so major question is, how are we able to feed the world by 2050 sustainably and in an efficient way? And this is basically a challenge and an opportunity at the same time. And so this seminar series serves for innovation, collaboration, and discussion among QAAFI and industry. And the goal is to secure the future food system. And Charlotte will just give you some general housekeeping rules.
Yeah, so before starting, just a few things. Please keep your microphone muted. And after Annie's presentation, you're free to unmute yourself and ask a question. Or if you're too shy, just pop the question in the chat. And we're gonna read them.
All right.
Joy, let's start it.
Yeah, let's get started. So today it's my pleasure to introduce Annie Osborne from the Good Food Institute that is based in the US. So Annie, how are you today?
I'm doing great. Thank you guys so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you for joining. You're welcome to share your screen. I just have a question. If you could just quickly introduce GFI, what it does, and yeah, that'd be great. Thank you so much, and we're very excited to hear your presentation.
Yeah, very excited to speak with you guys. Give me 1 sec. I'm just going to share my screen. All right. So today I'm going to be talking to you guys about rethinking our food system to feed a growing population. I'll start off by giving just a brief overview of the Good Food Institute, who we are, what we do. Then I'm going to be talking about our theory of change and why we think that alternative protein is really a way to fundamentally transform our food system. And then I'll go into more detail about the types of alternative protein that we work on specifically and some of the research opportunities that we see around those types of food technology. So to start off with, just briefly, the Good Food Institute is a nonprofit organization based in the US. We also work globally. We have teams living in India, in Asia Pacific, in the European Union, in Brazil, and in Israel. And we also have a sister organization called Food Frontier that works in Australia and New Zealand, and I'll direct you guys to them again at the end of this presentation. So what the Good Food Institute does is we work through science and technology, through corporate engagement, and through policy engagement to basically create a clear pathway for alternative proteins to come to market. So that can involve working on legislation that makes it easier for people to start new businesses in this field. It could involve working with established corporations who are looking to invest their research and development dollars in alternative proteins. And it can involve working with scientists and researchers who have skill sets in enabling technologies around alternative protein. So that in general is what the Good Food Institute does. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about why we do what we do. So fundamentally, the Good Food Institute promotes alternative protein, and in particular, we promote plant-based and cultivated plants, eggs, and dairy, and fermentation-derived products. Why do we do this? Why do we not just recommend that everybody eats a plant-based whole foods diet? The fundamental reason is that people really, really like meat. It is culturally significant, it's nutritionally significant, and it just tastes really good to most people most of the time. Even though there are places in the world where there are large vegetarian populations, meat is just a really central part of the vast majority of human diets. And so any solution that we come up with is going to have to take on some, if not all, of the roles that meat currently plays in our food system. The issues around meat consumption, though, the reason that we think that we need an alternative, are also pretty glaring. So the most obvious is animal suffering. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about that. I do want to talk, though, a little bit more about two other major negative impacts of industrial animal agriculture, those being environmental degradation and then harm to this general category that I call human flourishing. So if we start by looking at environmental degradation, we see reports from the Food and Agriculture Organization at the UN saying that animal agriculture is one of the most significant contributors to all the most serious environmental problems at every scale, from local to global. Essentially what this means is that any major environmental problem affecting our planet from a local to a global scale, that problem will be exacerbated in some way by industrial animal agriculture. So that can be climate change, it can be land use change, it can be local pollutions, lots of different things. And the reason for that is that turning animals into food is not particularly efficient. Animals have to eat plants in the same way that humans have to eat in order to produce energy. So if you feed a chicken, which is the most efficient terrestrial animal at turning feed into human food, if you feed a chicken 9 edible calories, 1 food calorie will come out. So that's kind of the equivalent of having like 9 plates of food and throwing 8 of them away. It's a really inefficient way to produce food. And that is a big part of what contributes to all of these negative environmental externalities. In terms of harm to human suffering or human flourishing and the suffering that that causes, this also comes a lot from agricultural's inherent inefficiencies. But I like to think about this in terms of who we're actually growing food for. So Earth's surface is just about 30% land, most of it is ocean. And of that land, 71% is habitable. There's lots of truly inhospitable land where people can't live. And excuse me, it's very hot here, so I'm gonna be drinking a lot of water through this. Of the habitable land, 50% is dedicated in some way to agriculture. Very little is urban, although obviously most people live in urban areas, but most inhabited land is going to be agriculture or in some way devoted to food production. The interesting part becomes when we look at how agricultural land is actually divided. 77% of agricultural land goes to raising livestock, and only 23% goes to growing crops that are going to be directly consumed by humans or processed into food that humans eat directly. Of that, though, 2/3 of our protein supply is coming from crops, and only 1/3 is coming from animal sources. So we have a huge mismatch in the way that we are devoting our land globally to different types of protein production. We're devoting 3/4 of our land to producing 1/3 of our protein. We would be able to produce significantly more protein on less land if we were not using livestock. So the question really becomes, who are we feeding? Are we feeding a human population that we want to flourish, or are we feeding a livestock population that's going to be eaten? And as we think about this, we notice that there are a number of different negative impacts on human flourishing that grow from systemic animal agriculture and industrial animal agriculture. Most notably recently are pathogens that jump from animal hosts to human hosts. Over the past 25, now about 35 since the study was published, years, we've seen that 75% of new human pathogens come from animals. It seems like the COVID virus that is affecting all of us so much right now, that is also a zoonotic disease. It's unclear exactly what the intermediary host was, but it seems like the disease originated in bats and then jumped to humans in a wildlife market. So in general, eating animals has a really negative effect on humans through virus jumping from host to host. That in turn really affects the economy. The World Bank anticipates that the economic downturns that are resulting from COVID are going to reverse years of progress towards these international development goals and tip tens of millions of people back into poverty. So all of this is coming in part from the system that is really interwoven with consuming animals, even though COVID itself did not come from an industrial animal farm. Similar to this, it's not viral, but it's bacterial. We see the growth of superbugs in response to basically overenthusiastic antibiotic use in animals that are being grown for human consumption. So in the United States, we see that 70% of medically relevant antibiotics are consumed by animals and not by humans. Lots of that is prophylactic, which means that it's not actually, animals aren't being fed like a full course of antibiotics to treat an infection. They're being given antibiotics in part to grow fatter and in part to ward off infection. And what this does is lead to the development of superbugs that are antibiotic resistant. So all of this leads us to consider, why are we still eating meat? It's really bad for animals. Obviously, they're getting killed. It's not good for the environment. It's really resource intensive. It forces us to divert a number of precious resources away from feeding humans and towards feeding animals, and it ends up making humans very sick. There are also kind of long-term disease burdens of overweight and obesity, which is often linked to higher meat consumption, as well as heart disease. So given all of that, how many of us are actually going to go vegan right away? Virtually nobody. And the reason that nobody's going to go vegan is because, well, I don't know how many people in this particular group are vegan. Some of you guys might be more or less likely to go vegan. But the reason that most people don't go vegan upon hearing this information is that meat is still really good and really important. So in order to go from this kind of situation resulting from our food system to a more positive situation resulting from our food system, we need something that will directly compete with meat and will fulfill the sort of role that meat plays in our diets. We need to compete along three key metrics with meat, anything that's going to replace it. And those metrics are taste, price, and convenience. Taste is clear. Nobody is going to buy a replacement product or a new version of a product in high volumes if it doesn't deliver on taste. That's the primary thing they're buying it for. Price also, people just can't afford things if they're too expensive. Convenience is a little bit vaguer. Essentially what it means is that if you go through a grocery store and something's not there, it's not convenient. So if an alternative is only available in like a Whole Foods in San Francisco, that's not convenient for most people. If it's not clear how to cook a new product, that's not convenient because somebody needs to learn a new recipe. And generally, if it requires a big behavior change, things aren't convenient. So any solution that is going to replace conventional meat and improve the various negative externalities currently being experienced by our external system, anything like that is going to need to compete on taste, price, and convenience. And that is the Good Food Institute's theory of change. So we think that the solution that will compete along the lines of taste, price, and convenience, we think that that is alternative protein. And when we talk about alternative protein, we're talking about three kinds. The first is plant-based protein, which uses which uses plants to biomimic the constituent parts of meat. So you're using plants to mimic fat, protein, various flavors, all of that is plant-based. Fermentation is a process by which you use microbes to grow a certain ingredient. Often it'll be a protein or enzyme. And then animal cell culture, you start with cells originally taken in a harmless biopsy, now increasingly taken from cell lines. You start with those cells and you grow them in a feedstock bath, or also known as cell culture media, and you grow those eventually into a three-dimensional meat structure. Animal cell culture produces a product that, molecularly speaking, is meat. Plant-based protein, that is a product that is mimicking meat at the structural level, and fermentation is producing one single ingredient that can be incorporated into both plant-based and cultivated protein. So those are the three categories that we're talking about when I personally talk about alternative protein. I'm happy to answer questions about why we don't look at other kinds of protein, but this is what we limit our own scope to. So I'm going to first talk about plant-based meat. As I said, it's just using plants to biomimic the constituent parts of meat. And I do want to just make it clear that this is distinct from old veggie burgers. When we talk about plant-based meat, we're talking about something that really functions the same way meat does. It isn't just something that you can like throw on the grill and serve to a vegetarian because they need something they can put on a bun at a party. So what we're currently looking at is made out of probably wheat or soy. The first kind of generation of these veggie products, they were made out of wheat and soy because they were common agricultural byproducts. They were easy to experiment with, and their protein isolates were really good for creating sort of meat-like textures. So originally, we were using these kinds of byproducts, to create things that looked like this. The plants being used hadn't really been perfected for this particular application. They were just what was cheap and easy to find. But now what we see is a new generation of really plant-based meats, not just like planty protein. And we see a wider range of crops that are actually utilized in creating the final product. We see a wider range of formulations. We see different flavor palettes. We see different structures. And generally, we just see a lot more variety and a lot more intentionality behind the products that people are eating. I do want to just show a quick little video about the Impossible Burger so that people get a sense of what is really going into these foods. Hopefully this is going to play during screen share.
The first thing I wanted to know was what actually went into the burger.
Here, what we have in front of me is all of those natural plant ingredients that, when recombined in the right ratio, creates meat. This is soybeans, and the soybeans have been kind of texturized, and this gives you the high protein content and the nice chew and texture of meat. We're gonna mix on in.
Okay, so that was just water.
That was just water. This is potato protein, and also in here are nutrients. And these nutrients bring both the nutritional aspects as well as flavor components that react upon cooking.
It tastes like a gravy.
Potato protein in the raw state helps everything bind together. Upon cooking, it gels up to hold water to make it nice and juicy and a nice chew down. Our next ingredient is like hemoglobin. So all plants actually have heme. In the raw state, it tastes metallic. And upon cooking, it reacts with those simple nutrients that we just put in the burger and creates all the flavors of meat.
Chicken tastes like blood?
I think so.
It tastes like ocean blood.
A little salty?
Yeah.
There are flavor compounds created by heme that have been shown to be the drivers of what carnivores will go and crave after. And what fat does is it really a lot of times traps good flavor and then is a delivery system. Sunflower oil is a unsaturated fat, so a lot of people say it's a good fat. Also in here is cellulose. So that's what holds all plants together. And what on the back of your label is called fiber. So that is what we add here to allow for the whole product to be bound together.
I actually think I could do it at home. It'd be like water, bouillon cubes, my blood, mayonnaise, and I don't know, I guess coconut fat is the only thing I can do for that.
The coconut oil, it can really trap the delicious flavors that we're generating here. This mixing bowl is representing a giant mixer, like your KitchenAid, and that is then just maybe the half this room.
Oh, huge mixer.
And then all the downstream is exactly like a meat factory, forming it into either patties or bricks.
Okay.
One of the biggest shakeups in...
Sorry, let me try to get off this slide without starting it again. Cool, okay. I'm hoping, since I don't see any major chats coming up, that you could all hear that. So I'm gonna talk just briefly about the texturized soy that was mentioned in that video, and just clarify that right now, the primary way that we create textured plant proteins is through extrusion. In particular, we use low moisture extrusion for restructured meat products. So those are things like hamburgers or sausages, or like chicken nuggets. And then for a high moisture extrusion process, that would be for something that is more like a whole cut meat product, like a fillet or a strip. Increasingly, we're also starting to see shear cell production used for these larger whole meat products. But generally, when you're looking at plant-based meat in the supermarket aisles now, you're going to be looking at extruded products. And that is true for just like the wide variety of products that you're going to see. In terms of the market for plant-based meat, people are often just curious how popular this is. This goes up until 2019. Obviously, making predictions about the market in 2020 has become a fool's errand. So I'll just say that over the past 3 years, essentially, we've gone from seeing alternative meat products and these plant-based meat products at a couple hundred restaurant chain locations to nearly 10,000, actually I believe over 10,000 now, now that we have seen Burger King, White Castle, TGI Fridays, Carl's Jr., all these folks adding products like the Impossible Burger and the Beyond Burger to their menus. And we've seen that at places like TGI Fridays and Burger King, we've seen really quick transitions from test menus to permanent menus for these types of menu items. This is a projection that I'm not really sure if I should leave in at this point because all these projections are, who knows with COVID. But I do just want to say that before all of this happened, we were projecting a plant-based meat market that would reach anywhere from 100 billion to 370 billion by the end of 2035. The way that investment is going to work here is just really up in the air right now. So I won't say too much more about that. But I do also just want to point out that there's a wide variety of brands here. 2 of these brands actually, I believe, are from Australia and New Zealand. Made with Plants, I think, is Australian, and Sunfed, that boar bacon one, I think that's from New Zealand. So there are a lot of people from all over the world getting in on this. A lot of Asian brands, Singaporean brands are really trying to get ahead of this trend. So now I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk about cultivated meat. And I'm going to just first walk through a little bit more what the process of making cultivated meat really looks like. And I'm going to talk about the ways that we can optimize each of the steps in the main process. So the process begins with isolating a cell line, originally from a living livestock animal. Now we're typically just drawing on cell lines that have previously been developed. So you start with a small sample of cells and you put them into a cultivator or a bioreactor and you grow the cells. This is done through doubling, which is cell proliferation, and typically you're looking for 30 or 40 doublings before you have the amount of biomass that you want to craft into a meat product. The cells that are growing in here are stem cells, so they can become a number of different cells. They're pluripotent, they're not totipotent. So the next step is having those cells differentiate or mature into their final adult target cell. And this is all done on a physical scaffold that creates the three-dimensional structure that it naturally occurs in an animal. Cells need to have access to what in this system is the media, and in the human body is the circulatory system, so that they can get access to nutrients and things called growth factors. Growth factors are the things that actually differentiate cells, and cell differentiation is what takes place after cells proliferate in the stem cell form. So cell differentiation is where you get muscle cells, fat cells, blood cells in the specific ratios that you want. And that is done by controlling the growth factors that are in your cell culture media, the stuff that is feeding the cells. So through that whole process, at the end of it, ideally, you would be getting a final product. A kind of crumbly ground meat final product is going to be the easiest thing to make because it requires very little scaffolding. A thick marbled piece of meat, that's going to require significantly more sophisticated scaffolding than we currently have. It will require more targeted cell differentiation as well, so that cells become fat or muscle or whatever, in the formation that you want them to, so that you don't get marblings of fat running through the wrong parts of the meat. So meat scientists actually have a really big role to play in creating this product and making it more true to life. Just as a very quick overview, the cultivated meat industry is incredibly nascent. We had the first cultivated meat in 2013 that was actually eaten. That was done by Professor Mark Post. 3 years later, we finally had a commercial venture produce a cultivated meat ball. A year after that, now we're only 3 years ago, we had the first cultivated fish created by Finless Foods. So Mark Post is in Amsterdam, Memphis Meats and Finless Foods are in the Bay Area. And then last year, in 2019, a Singaporean company called Shiok Meats made cultivated shrimp and put it in a dumpling. So we're really seeing the absolute beginning of this industry. That said, though, we're also seeing huge growth in this competitive landscape. 5 years ago, there were 5 companies not in stealth mode. Now we're looking at 60 plus, and that number was growing up to the pandemic. We're not sure what this is going to look like on the other side. But we're seeing both business-to-business startups that are trying to apply either existing technology to this new product, or they are startups that are trying to specialize just one specific type of technology for the startups that are creating products. In terms of the products, you typically see a single company creating a single type of meat. Occasionally people will branch out, and then you also have some pet food folks. In terms of public acceptance of clean meat, we don't have a ton of information of how willing people are to eat this. Not yet anyway, but we do have a brief sort of short survey made of US adults. About 2/3 of people are at least willing to try cultivated, or it's also called clean meat. 53% are willing to replace conventional meat with it, but only 46% are willing to buy it regularly, and only 40% are willing to pay more. So we're going to have to wait a good long time to get down to a competitive price point. Again, this is a really nascent industry. So we expect to see kind of a luxury product on the market 3 to 5 years from now. All of these predictions, again, they're going to be off because of COVID. But before that, we were expecting to see an expensive high-end product like bluefin tuna or Kobe beef. We would have seen that first, and then probably 5 to 10 years out, we would have seen a product that is price competitive with conventional meat. So that's kind of the time frame that we're looking at for cultivated meat. In terms of just the opportunities that we see in alternative protein, we really see it as a dynamic and growing field, and we hope that people move into it and treat it as its own specialty in food science. In terms of plant-based meats, there's a whole slew of things that people can do. I'm just going to go over 4 things kind of in order along the pipeline. First is identifying the right crops for new plant-based meat formulations. As I said, historically, we've only used soy and wheat. Those are not necessarily the best things to use. They were just cheap and available. So if we can find a better subset of crops, maybe not even things that we currently eat in big volumes because they don't taste good outside a given formulation, but if we can find a new category of crop that would really make these types of products stand out, that would be a wonderful thing to study. It's the sort of thing that you can use a lot of predictive computing for as you try to predict what types of plants might have the right properties for these kinds of applications. So that's one thing. The next is improving how we isolate and functionalize raw materials. So these are things like protein isolates, different types of micro and macronutrients so that you can fortify this food so that it is nutritionally equivalent or superior to conventional meat. But also trying to figure out how you get these materials really to mimic the mouthfeel and chew of meat. Anybody who's had these products, you probably have observed them getting better, but they wouldn't fool you yet in terms of whether or not they taste like meat. So working on raw materials to improve those products and make them healthier, that's also really exciting work. In terms of processing the ingredients, as I said before, we mostly use extrusion right now. There's no reason to believe that that is the best way to be making this food. And it's also not a guarantee that we've gotten the right parameters on the extrusion protocol that we're using. So I also mentioned shear cell technology. That is becoming increasingly popular in creating a more complex cut of plant-based meat. There might be other methods that we just haven't explored yet. Taking a step back, trying to characterize ingredients with data, that is part of identifying what the right crops are to begin applying to these types of products. It's also a really great way to figure out what the properties of plants that we have tried, which of those really work to create plant-based meat and which don't. And then the final thing is just assembling the end product and bringing everything together so that it really feels like meat when you bite into it. So that means that all of the various isolized and functionalized parts have come together. We figured out all the various flavorings. We figured out how it can be cooked in a way that doesn't require people to change their behavior. Bringing all of this together, that's often where a company will come into play, although people often will often commercialize technology that they have developed in an academic setting as well. So that's plant-based meat. And then I'm gonna run through cultivated meat too. The first big challenge in cultivated meat, where some of the biggest opportunities are, is in producing low-cost and animal-free cell culture media. So when you are using cell culture media to precipitate cell differentiation, you need things called growth factors. And those growth factors are going to determine what a cell becomes. In very early medicine, which is where this technology was developed to regenerate organs, people used fetal bovine serum initially to provide growth factors. That is very expensive, and it's not a particularly consistent way to trigger cell differentiation. However, it is less expensive than some of the more consistent synthetic growth factors that they now use in the medical field. So the current challenge is to figure out how to get those growth factors from a non-biological source, so from a synthetic source, without making the solution incredibly expensive and keeping it food grade. So that's a really interesting area of study if you are interested in cell media formulation. Another thing is figuring out how to build edible porous scaffolding. Porous so that the cells have access to nutrients and they don't die. Edible so that we really can grow this kind of cultivated meat so that it really mimics what we would see coming off of a conventional animal. at scale, we're going to need to get really great bioreactors that measure all of the important parameters for growing a specific type of meat. So electrical engineers, mechanical engineers, all sorts of folks are going to be helpful here. And then in general, we recommend that people check out our resources for more opportunities in this field and to get a sense of what the unanswered questions in this field are and how you can take your talents and apply them to alternative protein if you're interested. So I'm just going to call out a couple of resources that I think will be useful to folks. First, we have a database of people who want to work together on research at gfi.org/collaborate. You can join that or check out other people who want to work together. Next, we've got a community that you can find at gfi.org/community. You can just join that community and participate in online discussions about alternative protein and attend free seminars. And then I also just want to remind you to visit foodfrontier.org. They are the Australian Good Food Institute. They're a sister organization of ours, and they have a lot of really great information that is specific to your region, which I fully admit I am not an expert on. So I do highly recommend that you check out Food Frontier as well. And you can always reach me at annio@gfi.org with any questions that you might come up with after this afternoon or morning for you.
Thank you so much, Annie. That was a great presentation, and I think now we have a great overview of what's going on in the alternative protein world and why we are moving towards alternative protein. And so in the chat, we had some really interesting points. I think also very good for discussion. Let me just scroll up a bit. So I would like to call up Ben and Marta. I think these are really, really interesting points. They were saying that we are missing the point that a lot of land is used to raise livestock, and that is actually not suitable for cropping. And Marta mentioned that it would be also interesting to see the distribution of land for each type of livestock. So I think as we have this seminar series, so next week we have a research Q&A with researchers, and I think these would be great for a discussion over there because we have researchers that have insights on that. So Annie gave us today an overview of the issue and like an introductory session. So please join next week's research Q&A and please raise these for these comments for discussion there. Sorry that and so I will give now the word to Charlotte, and she will ask the questions. Thank you again.
Thank you, Saskia. So I'm gonna ask you the questions that are in the chat. We had a lot of questions. So the first is, what is the view of the Good Food Institute about editable insects as an alternative protein source?
So I think the first thing to say is that for a lot of people, they are not an alternative protein source. They're just a regular protein source. For I think 2 billion people regularly eat insects, so that's a good portion of our world. They see them as just a regular protein source. That said, we do see insects as another trophic level. So a trophic level is just you've got plants, and then anything between the plants and the thing that eventually gets fed is a trophic level. So if you're feeding plants to cows and then cows to humans, the cows are a trophic level. We see insects as a trophic level. Typically, they can be raised on unprocessed waste streams only if they are being grown and used in feed for livestock animals. So typically what you'll see is like waste being used to feed like black soldier flies, and those get processed into protein that gets fed to livestock. The goal of the Good Food Institute is not to have livestock. That is like, we don't see that as a sustainable form of food production because you still are mixing the insects with a number of grains. They're not necessarily waste grains. While it's true that there are some livestock that are raised on otherwise non-productive land, the vast majority of them are not. I do know that that's slightly different in Australia. Globally, like in the United States, 94% of our livestock are raised on feedlots and not in open range settings. So given all that, we see insects primarily as just a way to make a bad situation moderately better. In terms of feeding insects directly to humans who don't already eat them, it's a lot harder to feed insects with waste because they grow at a non-consistent rate. So you end up having to process the waste a lot more. You can't necessarily use just commingled waste streams, and it becomes a significantly more expensive proposition and harder to get safely certified by various regulators. So it's not impossible. We don't generally use it, and we see the more economical side of it supporting a system that we personally are not part of. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, I think so. So we had a lot of questions about the alternative meat. And so I'm gonna start like one by one.
Yeah, go for it.
So the first is meat, like alternative meat products are expensive than the usual meat. What is going to convince people to buy these products? And also, who are the 46% willing to buy regularly? And what is their socioeconomic characteristics?
So that I don't know. That's just from a general public
Okay.
survey. I don't believe that they ended up separating out. This is all very early. I mean, this is all so theoretical. A survey like that, like, would you buy this product in 15 years? I mean, that's only so valuable, right?
Yes.
But I would say the way that people are going to be convinced to buy these is that they will not continue to be more expensive. There is no particularly good reason that they should continue to be more expensive. They require significantly less energy, significantly less land to produce, significantly less water. If you are on a clean grid, if you can get your energy use down, they can be extremely energy efficient to make. So the real issues are figuring out how to cheaply formulate a product, how to get it nutritionally comparable to conventional meat. So right now, the pluses are that it's got as much or more protein than conventional meat, also has fiber, which is really good. Downsides are that it has a lot of sodium, potentially more even than seasoned beef. It's usually compared to unseasoned beef. And then obviously the downsides are the price. There just aren't enough competitors who are creating at a large enough scale right now to drive the price down. As the industry matures, we expect to see a pretty sharp decline. Already, like the Impossible Whopper at Burger King is pretty inexpensive.
That's good. So you were talking about the content and that has more fiber. There is a question about that they're asking how much energy water is required to generate these fake burgers, and also how are these balanced diet, and what's the carbohydrate protein fat ratio, and also minerals. Annie? I think we have a problem.
Let's see if she will join us again.
We have a situation. Sorry.
She dropped out of the session,
no.
But I think this is a great opportunity to raise a discussion.
Yes.
Among ourselves, because clearly this is not a general public, this is a scientific public. And most of our researchers actually raised really good points, especially yes. from the animal science team,
Ben.
which I belong to as well.
Hi, Ben.
So do you have comments on these, Ben? Something that you would like to share for every one of us? Because of course, it's good to have comments from both sides, right?
Okay, I'd just like to reinforce my previous comment that livestock, particularly ruminants, take advantage of this great resource that we have, for example, in Western Queensland, Northern Territory, and so on, where you have these grasslands that are really completely unsuitable for anything else. You can't crop there, you can't grow horticulture there. So one way of turning that resource into high value protein is through livestock. And if you don't have livestock, it just goes to waste. And somehow you have to fill in that protein gap with something else by cutting down productive forests or something like that. So this idea that you can just switch the land that livestock are raised on over to cropping land, in Australia at least, is just not the reality.
Yeah, that's true. Really good point. Thanks, Ben, for that. Does anyone else want to contribute to the discussion? Do we have Annie?
No.
Not still?
No.
So we have Mike here also from nutrition, giving us the perspective from the nutrition and food science thing. So Mike, would you like to comment here on, you know, how when we think about alternative foods and how these are ultra processed foods, how do we get people to accept this?
Thank you very much. Yeah, a couple of points. One is that we've been down this road before. So we went down this road in the 1970s when fat was the villain, and we ended up with all sorts of low fat products, and now we're regretting that. We went down this road in the 90s with low carbs, and we're continuing going down that road, and we will probably live to regret that as well. So I just see this as the next sort of technological food. And the thing that really worries me is this is a completely fabricated food, that you are taking all of these good raw ingredients from plants, and instead of cooking up the pulses and having a great pulse-based meal, you're extracting out the 25 or 30%, which is protein, and then reformulating that with synthetic hemoglobin and a lot of salt and so on to give something which tastes a bit like meat. So, as I say, we've been down this road before as a society for reasons that then were driven by fears of fat and then sugar, and now we're driven by fear of land use and available protein. And I think the other really important point is that the emphasis on land use only is part of the point. When you look at the environmental analyses associated with these plant-based meats, they don't take into account all of the refining costs that it takes to go from a pulse or a cereal to that small amount of protein, and what you do with the other 70+%. Typically at the moment, and this is really quite hypocritical of this area, is that most of that goes into animal feed. So for groups that have this sort of high ground in terms of not wanting to use so much animals in the supply chain, their business is dependent on much of the raw material actually going back into that animal supply chain. So they need to get called out on that as well. So the thing around nutrition at the moment is that the best evidence that we have is that whole foods and a balance and a variety of whole foods in our diet is what leads to good, sustainable health outcomes. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that you should always, that means you should eat as much meat as you like. It's a question of balancing out the protein sources of other things. But we base our nutrition advice now on whole foods. We do not base it on nutrients. We do not base it on the fat content, the lipid content, the protein content, and so on. So to say that you switch from one protein content to another without any change in the nutrition is just not true. We now know that the whole food idea is important, and if you break the food down into ingredients and reformulate it, like in Possible Burgers, you're losing quite a bit of the nutritional attributes that you started off with. I think I'll stop there. You can tell I'm on my hobby horse here, but I think these are really strong arguments that need to be properly addressed.
Yes, we have Annie back, so.
Okay.
I'm very sorry. I only caught a little bit of that. I don't know why I got
That's
kicked
all right.
off this call.
No worries.
Thanks, Annie. So we just had a discussion with our center directors from animal science and nutrition and food science to give us their perspectives on the topic. So that was great. Thanks for that. So do you want to take another question, Charlotte?
Yes, so the one that yeah, but we are off topic now.
I'm happy to address some of what I heard. I mean, certainly we're under no illusions that we're not part of an existing animal agriculture system. Our entire food system revolves around animal agriculture. The only buyers for agricultural waste do tend to be folks in that industry. I'm trying to remember what some of the other ones were. Nutritional stuff. I mean, we just, again, all of this stuff is super early. I don't think that anybody is pushing the Impossible Burger or the Impossible Whopper as like a healthful food. Like once you've gotten to the part of your day where you're deciding between a Whopper and an Impossible Whopper, that has become less of a foreground of your decision making. But I think that we absolutely recognize that as an issue. The products that are out there right now are mimicking heavily processed food. So we're really hoping to see what new forms of technology that essentially require less processing, what they can do for these products. Shear cell technology, for example, ends up doing a lot less processing to given protein isolates, and you need to do less isolation in general. There's a lot of research going into the types of fractionation that you would end up splitting out from plants. If you can basically fractionate less of a plant, there's far less being lost in your formulation. Essentially, we're really early on in the discovery process of a promising new food technology. I forget some of the other.
That's a great point. We are early on, and so we can still like also have an impact on how we are doing this, because I feel like a lot of companies are using this as an opportunity. Oh, we can make a startup and we can make money here, and they are using or misusing this trend of plant-based food. And I feel like a lot of people are losing the point of why we actually produce plant-based meat alternatives, right? So I think it's very important that now we focus on the right things, and I think we are going down the right track.
So like this is good just to decrease the consumption of meat. We don't have to remove all the meat consumption, and this is a good alternative. But there was like a question about the content, like if you know how much carbohydrate, protein, and fat ratio, and also minerals, and if they can cause allergies or if there is any problems.
Yeah, so allergenicity is a big concern for any processed foods. Generally, anybody who's working in the space right now is just following standard allergy labels. Any new products typically have to be, like in the US, it's generally recognized as safe. I don't know what exactly the legislation or the regulation is for Australia. But yeah, things are typically tested for things like that, and they're advertised containing things like soy and gluten. Impossible has that soy hemoglobin, which is genetically modified. Sorry, I feel like I've lost track of the question a little bit. I'm so sorry.
No, like if about the content of carbs.
Oh, right. Sorry, the actual product. So the actual product content is just meat, right? So the point is to nutritionally mimic. In plant-based meat, it's to mimic the biomimic the component parts of the meat. Sorry, I missed the person who was speaking before. Obviously, there's debate on whether that's the right way to measure nutrition or not. Right now, that's how we're measuring it. So whatever that mix is going to be meat. It's not supposed to be like its own whole meal. It's supposed to be a protein source. You still need to eat like carbs and fat with it.
So lab-grown meat have the same nutritious content compared with the real meat?
Lab-grown meat would be as good or potentially better if we can figure out different ways to improve cell culture media.
Okay. We have a question from Ben. Do the Impossible Burger include omega-3 and other important nutrients that are in beef?
Yeah, I guess this raises the, it's just because you just mentioned that we could compare those two things when clearly we can't at this point in time. We cannot compare, in terms of the real nutrition content from meat and something that will grow in the lab. So
right. So I think like there's no reason to think they would be different just because they're molecularly identical. But I say, yeah, you're right. We haven't been able to compare it yet because there's not enough.
Well, actually, just because we're approaching the end of the session, I would like to invite everyone to just give their take-home message or raise, any suggestions that you may have. Feel free to just unmute yourself. Annie, would you like to go first? Just a quick take-home message for the public.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think for us, the take-home is really that this is all incredibly new. We are at the start of a really long runway that we hope is going to yield some incredibly wonderful technology that feeds us better, gives more people access to more protein. And in order to do that, we really, really need highly talented, highly motivated people who want to make our food system better. So if this is something that you're interested in and you want to apply your talents to this area, I highly recommend you do so. And we've got tons of resources to help you out with that on our website.
So we have another question from Tim. He's saying, what about generating a burger with 0 saturated fat?
So theoretically, in cell-based meat, you could potentially do that, right? Like you control the molecules that are going into a burger, not the molecules, but the cells. You're controlling the ratio of different types of cells in a cut of meat. So theoretically, you could do that. I don't know how good it would taste. You would probably have to replace it with something else, possibly synthetic, possibly not. But yeah, theoretically, you could do that. You need to find a different, like the binding would be different, but yeah.
Okay, good. So just one thing. So we are on social media. If you want to follow us, I'm gonna just pop here in the chat our 2 account to follow what we are up and the next session that we're gonna do.
Yeah. So we have here some very interesting comments as well that I think we could address this on our next session, which is gonna be with the actual QAAFI researchers from all of our centers.
I'm gonna share with you the file with all the speakers. It's an image and you can see who will talk about it. So
yeah, and it will be great to have you all there as well. And I think this will be the perfect chance to address more complex questions and also to learn from our own researchers here at QAAFI to understand what is being done in the space of food production and innovation. So thank you so much to everyone. Thank you, Charlotte and Saskia, for hosting. Now I'll let you both close the session.
Thank you for everyone to be here with us, to share time with us and discuss about alternative food for a sustainable planet. And thank you very much, Annie, for your great presentation. That was very interesting. And I'm very interested in this topic. So that was awesome.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Thank you so much. We're very excited. This is our first session of the 3-part.
Yes, and there's so many some amazing researchers here with us. So very exciting. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you guys.
So see you all. Yes, Annie. Sorry.
Oh, feel free to email me with more questions about.
Okay. Thank you so
guys.
much.
Thank you.
Don't forget next Thursday, 2 p.m.
Yeah, register.
See you all there.
Eventbrite.
Same link. You can use the same link next time.
Yes.
See you all.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.